Um, Interviews are two-way streets, and it's important to remember that in everything I'm going to say from here on in. It's a little asymmetrical, but still, the employer is checking you out. They're looking at you, but you also want to interview the employer. Is this the kind of place I want to work? What kind of people are here? What kind of job conditions are here? You have a lot of questions that you want answered in this interview process. So don't think that it's only you that's on display. The institution itself is also on display. So let me just preface what I'm going to say by mentioning that interviews differ from country to country, and even within Israel, from university to university. There are many things that are in common. Increasingly, you're seeing pre-interviews and even full interviews being done on Zoom or on Skype. Many interviews will be in the future in person. So I'll talk a little bit more about Zoom and Skype later. But I think we can see enough commonality, enough that's the same from university to university to talk about the job interview process in more general terms. So the way I'm going to do it today is I'm going to divide it into three parts. The pre-interview preparation that you should be doing once you are lucky enough and skilled enough to get an interview. The second is the interview itself, the in-person or Zoom interview. And finally, very short, will be a part on the interview follow-up. And you can ask me questions at any time. I'll try and look up at the chat or find some other way to get my attention. So let's start with the pre-interview preparation. And there are really three different facets of this in preparing. First of all, it is very important to study the unit, the chug, the machlaka, whatever it is. You have to use every resource you can get your hands on in order to learn as much as you can about that department. Usually the department's website is very, very useful. You also can use any connections you may have with people at that university or college or other institution. Use your professors, any information you can get about that department is going to be useful to you. First of all, what do you want to know? You want to know first and foremost as much as you can about the curriculum there. Who teaches the kinds of subjects that you're interested in? Where would you fit into the curriculum? Which of the existing courses that are on the books would interest you? That is, you would like to teach them. Are there gaps that you see in the curriculum where you could fill in and help round out the department? And as you're studying the curriculum, you want to prepare questions, written questions, write them down, be ready for the actual interview itself so that you know as much as you can about the courses, who teaches the courses, how they're organized, the fields that they divide them into, and so on. The next thing you want to know about that department is how is it organized? Is there broad participation by the faculty in governance, or is it a top-down? Even here in Israel, I have seen political science departments which are diametrically opposed in the way that they are organized. What is the role of non-tenured faculty in those departments? I think that's very important for you to find out. Are they participating? Are they asked to do a lot? Are they sort of left alone? I know not the first, but it was first two jobs I had. The first job I had was at Tel Aviv University. And at Tel Aviv University at that time, a junior faculty, as a first-year person, I was treated really as an equal, as a builder of the department. It was a new department at the time. As someone who was going to take responsibility. They expected a lot of the new faculty. And then my second job was at Harvard University, where the untenured faculty were basically treated like graduate students. They were given no role in governance. They were not treated with much respect. You want to know if new faculty are expected to do significant amount of administrative work, because that's going to be very important in your career development. What is the department's record on promotions? Do people get promoted? Have they had difficulty promoting people? Who got promoted? Find out names, if you can, of people who have been promoted in the last 3 or 4 years, and look at their records. Go to their CVs, see what kind of publication or teaching record these people had. So it gives you an idea of what constitutes success in that department. And if you can, find out who has not been promoted and why they haven't been promoted. Look at their CVs and their records to see what really might be the blocks. The next thing you want to do in studying the unit is find out if there is a search committee. Most job processes involve the appointment of faculty members and sometimes even a graduate student to a search committee. These can be 3, 4, 5 people, sometimes even bigger. You want to know who is on that search committee. Again, you want to use all your sources. You don't want to be too forward. You don't want to seem to be interfering in the process. But if you can find out who's on the search committee, and certainly if the head of the search committee gives you a phone call or writes you an email, it's certainly okay to ask who are the other members of the search committee, or is there a search committee, who's on it? And then you'll be doing some more research on that, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So again, use any connections you can to find out as much as you can about that department. So that's the first thing you want to do in preparation, is study the unit. The second thing you want to do in preparing for your interview is to study the faculty. This is really important. You want to read what those people in the department have written. And first and foremost, you want to read the material of the people who are on the search committee. You want to know them well. What are they interested in? What kind of work do they do? What are their methodologies, and so on. These are the people you're definitely going to meet with, either in person or in a special Skype or Zoom session, and you want to know as much as you can about them. Write down questions about their work. Figure out if there is a connection between what you do, your research, and the work that they do. And just note that down. You want to prepare yourself with a whole portfolio about as many people in that department as you can possibly find out about. The third preparation is the most obvious one. You'll be asked in practically all cases to prepare a job talk. In some universities, like the University of Washington, where I taught for many years, they now have 2 job talks. You have what's called a research job talk and a teaching job talk, a kind of mock teaching of a class. I don't think that's done much in Israel, so most of the job talks that you will prepare for are on your research. And I'm going to talk more about that when I talk about the actual interview process. But here I want to emphasize how important it is in your preparation to have other people hear the talk. You need at least one and preferably 2 or 3 mock talks, mock interviews, practice interviews. You can do it with your mother. You can do it with your wife or husband. You can do it with your children. You can do it most usefully with other people in your department, your professors and your cohort of graduate students. You must practice. This is absolutely essential. To go in cold, first time giving a talk as a job talk is a recipe for disaster. And you want to ask yourself and them a series of questions. Does this talk capture their attention? Did they understand what you said? And did they feel it was well balanced? All these questions are very important. And in the practice job talk, you want to make it as realistic as possible. Let the people who are there, you're pretending to give the job talk, let them pretend to be the audience for your job talk. Give them an opportunity to ask substantive questions. This is going to give you a couple of things. First, it's going to give you a feel for the kinds of questions that people will ask you. It may not always work. Sometimes the questions come out of the blue. But you get a feel also for how to answer a question. The length of an answer. The length of an answer is very important. I'll come back to it a little later. The tone of your answers is very, very important here. It's really key because I think the job talk is overrated. I think faculty should read your materials and make most of their decision based on the written materials that you submit. But it is really, really important to many people, because many people in that department that you're interviewing for will not have read what you wrote, will not have looked at your file, and it's all going to come down to that job talk. So it's very, very important. Now, departments will ask you also as your preparation for the interview, they are going to ask you to submit written materials. Different departments ask for different sorts of things. Almost all of them will want sections of your dissertation, and you're going to have to choose carefully. You're going to have to choose carefully what sections you send them. We can talk about that a little bit in the question and answer period. Okay, I have one question here, which is, what do I mean by a well-balanced talk? And by that, I mean, I'm going to talk about it a little later, about what the components of the talk should be, what the different sections should be. And you don't want to spend too much time on any of them. I have seen job talks in which the introduction went on for 35 minutes, and the person was told, you only have 5 or 10 minutes now to finish, and they had to do the entire rest of the talk, rush through it in the last few minutes. So what I mean by well-balanced is that you really pay careful attention in your practice talks to the time and the time limit that they've given you, and how much time you devote to each section of the talk, which I'll talk about what those sections are shortly. So the written material, we can talk about which sections of your dissertation you might want to send. If you have any published works, you'll want to send those. They always ask also for letters of recommendation. We can talk more about that in the question and answer period, whom you want to ask for letters of recommendation. And many places now ask for a statement of research philosophy. That is, what is your research program? What have you done? What are you interested in? What do you plan to do? And many of them ask as well for a teaching philosophy. More and more in the United States, I don't know if this is true in Israel, David maybe can say, universities are asking for what's called a teaching portfolio, which demonstrates your experience in teaching, that you've been in the classroom before. It includes a teaching philosophy, how you teach and what kinds of methods you use and what you're hoping to accomplish in the class. And it also asks for any materials you have from classes that either you were a teaching assistant or that you taught on your own, such as your syllabi, any evaluations by students, exams that you have prepared, and these are all put into a portfolio. I have the feeling this is not done in Israel, and it's fairly recent in the United States as well. But in any case, you want to prepare any written material that goes into your job file in meticulously. You want someone else to read it over for typos, misspellings, grammar mistakes, anything that might have people form a negative impression of you. Have people read them over to make sure they're intelligible, that they're clear, that you are accomplishing what they asked. I'm going to stop here for a second and ask if there are any questions. Let's see. So Ilhavraz says, it has been done. Both teaching philosophy and statement of research are being asked for. Okay, that's interesting. Any other questions you might have on the preparation before you actually get to the interview? I'll give you a second to think. Okay, good. Again, if you have it at any time, just write it into the chat, or just write that you have a question and we can unmute you. Okay, so then comes the actual interview, the day that you're going to the university, the college, whatever institution it is, or the big Zoom part comes. And Zoom, I think, has transformed, because of the crisis we're in, has transformed the job process, the job interview process to some degree, but let's talk about it as if it's a real in-person live interview. There are 3 or 4 parts to the interview. These interviews, by the way, vary from a few hours to, or let's say an afternoon, to ones in the United States are usually 2 full days. And they are very, very intense. And I'm going to come back to that a little later, the intensity of them. The first part that I'll talk about is you are going to meet with some of the officials. Now, that may be the committee. It's almost always you're going to meet separately with the committee, the search committee. Sometimes you will meet with the chair of the department. That's pretty common as well. And third, you may meet with the dean, and that very much depends upon the university. Let me stop for a second. I have a question from Noga. Is it reasonable to add the teaching file in addition to formal evaluation from students, personal emails from students? Yes, all those things can go into a teaching portfolio. I wouldn't send the teaching portfolio without asking the head of the search committee if that's something that they would like to see. Either they'll ask it for you. If they don't ask it for you, say, I have prepared a teaching portfolio. Is that something that you would want me to send? And that's a nice initiative as well. So you're going to meet with the hierarchy, right? The big honchos, the dean, the chair, the search committee, and so on. And here, most of these people, not the dean so much, but the search committee certainly has read everything that you've submitted. They've read your teaching statement, they've read your parts of your dissertation. So they really, although they're going to ask you about your research, what they really want is to get a sense of the human quality here. And this is true. Many universities now have pre-interviews on Zoom or Skype, even when they have an in-person interview. And these pre-interviews are usually when they go from what they call a long list to a short list. That is, they've narrowed down the applicants to perhaps 10 or 12 applicants, and they have Skype or Zoom interviews with them, and then narrow the list to the ones that they're actually going to bring to campus for a final interview. So here in that interview with the committee, you really want to bring your personality forward. You want to use humor if you can. You definitely, and I'm going to come back to this again, don't want to get defensive. And I have seen this time and again in job interviews where applicants are asked a challenging question and they take it as a personal attack. The tone, here's where I mentioned tone before, the tone that they use is a kind of combative tone, sort of sticking up for what they've done, really seeing this, the question as an attack on them. It's very important not to do this. Practice not doing it. Have people ask you mean questions and find a way to answer in an engaging, positive way. That's very important. These interviews with the search committee, whether they're live or on Zoom, are short. They're usually about 20 minutes. Some may go a little longer. So you don't want to go on too long in your answers because you want to give them a chance to get through their questions. And so you want to find that sweet spot between being too abrupt, too short in your answer, and going on too long. Usually an answer of about 2 minutes, and you can practice that, will give you time to elaborate ideas without sounding like you're never going to stop. Be careful on how you prepare your answers. This is true for the job talk as well. And then invariably at the end, they're going to ask you, do you have questions for us? And it is very important that you have questions. And here's where you're going to show them that you did your homework, that you prepared yourself for the interview, that you've read the curriculum. And here's where you can ask those questions that I told you to write down in that first part. Who teaches this course? Is that a course that I might teach at some time? I notice you don't have a course on X. That's something I'm very interested in. Would that really help the department if I taught a course on that? And so on and so forth. You really want to prepare questions which will partly give you answers to things that you really want to know, but also will demonstrate to them that you're taking this very seriously and that you've prepped yourself. You're a serious person who has prepared for this interview. Also, here is where you could sneak in. I'll give you the other opportunity to do it in a moment, but here's where you can sneak in that you have read their articles, right? You could say, oh, Professor X, I know I've read your article on such and such. Do you teach a course on that? That's something I'm interested in too. Sneak in that you have read their materials. That is important. I'll come back to it in a moment. So that's the first thing you want is you're going to meet with these chairs. You're going to meet with these committees. You're going to meet possibly with the dean. They are all looking for the human quality here. Is this a person who's going to be a good colleague? Is it a person who looks like he or she would be a good teacher work well with others, and so on and so forth. So any questions about this? None yet. I'll keep my eye open. The second element in the interview is meeting with faculty and students. And again, this varies by department. I know in the department I worked in, when we would have a job candidate come in, there was a sheet that was then later done electronically that was passed around, in which everybody would sign up, not everybody, whoever wanted to would sign up for a 30-minute slot with the candidate one-on-one. So you're going to be meeting with a lot of these people, right? You're going to be meeting with a lot of these people. And if a department doesn't afford you that possibility, and I've seen departments that don't, that they don't have these one-on-one meetings with faculty, then you initiate them. You get in touch with the faculty and you say, oh, you know, I'm a candidate for the job here. I really would love to just have a chat with you if possible, either when I'm on campus or by Zoom or some other means. You want to have as many of those conversations as possible. First of all, they will tell you a tremendous amount about the department. You're going to get a variety of opinions. You're going to see if people are happy in that department, if they're not happy, if they seem collegial, if they're interested in your work. All kinds of things that are going to give you important feedback about that department will happen in those one-on-one meetings that don't necessarily happen in group meetings. Now, when you're in those meetings, it's best if you have done what I told you to do before, which is have read their material, at least 1 or 2 articles, and then tell them that you've done that and tell them how great their article is. Now, your first thought might be, no, I can't do that. Really, what professor is not smart enough to see that I'm just praising that professor because I want the job? Nope, it doesn't work like that. The way it works, actually, is that every professor thinks that her article is the greatest. And if you say that is really something that I found so insightful, they will think, oh, what a smart young candidate who sees how good my article is. So don't be afraid to praise the article, certainly cite it, talk about your connection to their work, even if it's somewhat remote. And ask them a series of questions. Ask them, especially the untenured faculty, ask them about the culture of the department. What is their own experience in the department? How does this department work? How do people relate to each other? Do they have reading groups? Do they have research seminars? Do people just go off on their own and work? Departments differ tremendously in their internal culture, and you want to find out what that culture is. So those half-hour sessions, or sometimes they're 15 minutes, are very, very important for you to find out an awful lot. And of course, at the same time, they're going to find out a lot about you, because in a one-on-one circumstance, they're going to make some lasting impressions of you. I'm not going to come back to that in a moment. In some departments, they also ask you to meet with students, usually graduate students, sometimes undergraduates. These are very useful. Again, you're going to find out a lot about the departments. Do the departments have a close relationship with their students, or are the students never there, only show up once a week maybe? Do the students have interaction with each other? Do they know each other? Do they feed off each other? All these are going to be important elements for you. What you want to do in those sessions with students, particularly the graduate students, is ask them about their interests, about their research, and always have a good follow-up question when they tell you something. Ask something specific about their research to show that you're really interested in the research of others and in the research of these students. These students are going to report back to the department. They may not have a vote, but their collective opinion is going to be important. Ask them what their experience in the department has been like, and what they think of the culture of the department. So that's the second thing. We've met with the brass, the committees, and so on. We've met with the normal faculty and students. The third part is the most important part, and that is the job talk itself. So we have before I get to that, we have a question from Adi. What about a new department that is starting? How do you start to talk to other people besides the head of the program, which I already did? One-on-one meetings. Well, if they have already hired some other faculty, which I imagine they have, I would ask the department chair, I'd love to talk to the people you hired, see what they have in mind, what they're thinking. Could you give me their emails, their phone numbers, whatever it is that you need to get in touch with them? I would, again, try and talk to as many people as you could, even if it's a startup department. Startups departments are fun. I mean, I was there in the Tel Aviv department when it was just getting off the ground, and it was, in some ways, I think it was the best job I ever had. If you're invited to a Zoom job talk on a different continent, will it be smart to create one-on-one meetings with faculty before the Zoom job talk? I don't think it matters whether it's before or after. I don't think that's a big deal, but I think the Zoom meetings one-on-one are absolutely critical. And if they don't initiate them, you should. You should sort of, and you can tell the committee, I'd really love to talk to some of the faculty. I'm going to get in touch with them, set up some Zoom meetings, just sort of find out more about the department. I'm really interested in what you're doing. So now let's go to the job talk, and this is the heart of what I'm going to say, and then we'll finish fairly quickly after that. All right. The first thing I want to say about a job talk is, this may seem very obvious to you, but it's not. And that is that the job talk is oral, O-R-A-L. That is, you're talking to people. It is not written material. And when you're talking to people, it's very different from writing it down. Why? Because when people are reading and their minds wander, they go back over the sentence again that they sort of forgot, or the paragraph while they were thinking about dinner that night. When you are talking to them, they can't go back over what you did, what you said. And so, and their minds wander. It's not only that they're wondering about what dinner is, often you will say something that's provocative and interesting, and they start thinking about that, and they are not hearing the next two paragraphs that you're saying. Okay, and you know this very well from classes that you're in and lectures that you've been to. You're hearing part of what one is saying. So the first thing to do is, you know how they say in real estate, the three most important qualities are location, location, location. Well, in giving a job talk, the three most important qualities are repeat, repeat, repeat. You're going to think to yourself, oh my God, I'm repeating, he wants me to repeat myself so many times. And that's because people aren't hearing it necessarily the first time, or they heard it the first time and they're not hearing it the second time. So it's really important to repeat your points. And I'll tell you how to do that in a second. Second element about the job talk that you want to think about as you're constructing it is you're really talking to two very different audiences here. And you have to be very, very careful. What do I mean? Let's say, oh, well, I don't want to give too many examples. I know you're from a variety of disciplines, but in every discipline, you are part of a subfield. You are dealing with a particular set of questions and literature that may be very different from what the majority of the people in that very department deal with. They don't know that literature. They don't know those ideas. I think of my friend who's in civil engineering, okay? Well, civil engineering, some people are purifying water, and some people are building bridges, and those people have no idea about the theoretical literature and the jargon and the way of thinking of the other people in the department. It's all in civil engineering, and it's true. I'm sure you can all think about that in your own fields. What does that mean? It means you're talking to the specialists in your area, in your subfield, who want to see whether you're conversant with the literature, whether you're steeped in it, and so on. And at the same time, you're talking to a more general audience of people in your profession who are going to find that extremely boring. They don't want to hear about what X says about this and Y and what the difference is and the nuances of the theories. They're not into it, and it's not interesting to them. So we'll come now. So how do you satisfy all this, and what does a good job talk look like? So let me say that there are about 8 parts. So if you're taking notes, you're going to go 1 through 8. Start your talk with 30 seconds and no more. Thank yous. Thank you for having me. Thank you to whoever arranged it. Perhaps even a small joke to kind of show your human side, humor, a little bit about getting there or doing it on Zoom, or some small joke just to put you and the audience a little bit at ease. And that's it, 30 seconds, no more than that. Then starts the actual talk. I find one of the best ways to do this, it doesn't always work, but it may work in your field, and I've mentioned this also in the writing talk I gave earlier. Anecdotes are very powerful. They're very, very powerful. They are stories that everyone can understand, but you want to pick them carefully so that they beg the central question of your talk. It becomes clear, oh, look at this contradiction. Some of these molecules behave this way, and some of these molecules behave totally differently. What's going on here? And you give some specific anecdote about that, and it should, in it, have your central question that you're trying to answer in that talk. By the way, in the talk, you do not necessarily want to cover your whole dissertation. If you've done 3 papers, you maybe just want to do one of those papers or even one part of the paper. The talk is contained. It's only usually 40 minutes. That's what you've got, and you don't want to try and stretch it too far. So you can take a part of what you've done and talk about that and start off with an anecdote. The anecdote generates the question that you're trying to answer in the course of the lecture. And you then, I'm already up to part 3, you then repeat the question. Remember, repeat, repeat, repeat. Put it up there. I'm going to talk about PowerPoint in a moment. But put that question up there in stark forms. That's going to be the only thing on the slide. The question. Repeat it again. At that point, that is the point where you're going to then talk to the specialists, and you're going to keep this limited, no more than 3 or 4 minutes, in which you then say, look, I'm not the first person dealing with this question. Others are dealing with it. Here are the kind of central theoretical ways that people have dealt with this. Now, this is very critical because you want to show those very few experts who are sitting in the room or on the Zoom screen in your field that you are steeped in this literature. And not only that you're steeped in this literature, but that you see yourself talking to the literature, being one of the contributors, one of the people in the conversation, that you're part of this, okay? You don't want to talk about the literature as some far off object that you've read and studied and are reporting to them about, but rather a conversation in which you are engaged and you are contributing to. But you're going to have to say to them, look, and I think be very frank with them. We could talk about this literature and the theories and so on for a long time, and I'm very happy to do that in the question and answer period, talk more about the people. You're going to mention specific theories and people. But let me get on with my talk and my answer to the question that I asked. So what you're doing is taking those 3 or 4 minutes to show how steeped you are in the literature, how much you're a part of it, and not drag it on too long, because you will, if you do, you will bore the other people to death. And now I'm going to also repeat something that I said in the last lecture. You do not want to frame your job talk through the literature. That is to say, you know, there is point A in the literature, which is really clear, and point C, which is really clear. But you know, no one has talked about point B, and I'm going to talk about that today. That is not the way, to get your audience attention. I call that filling the gap kind of talk, and you're really doing it by making the literature your framing device. Instead, you want to use as much as you can the empirical contradictions you found, whether it's in the lab or in your research in the field or in the archives, the questions that were generated in your actual research materials, not in the literature, to frame the talk. So, okay, let's see. We have one from Mayan, a question. In practice, there are so few positions that I feel the process is very asymmetric. The position is worth it almost at any price. I know I said it is asymmetric, and what can I tell you? How to not sound more picky than we actually are when asking a question about the culture of the department, whether people are happy, participation of the juniors in governance. I think it's a very good question, Mayan. How you ask those questions about the culture of the department and so on is very important. You want to ask them in a positive way, not like you're snooping around and trying to find out if there are factions that don't talk to each other, although it's nice to know that. But you want to find out as much as you can, how do you do things around here? What's it like? A genuine curiosity, which I think helps you in presenting yourself, but also tells you a lot. And I don't think that's picky to start asking about how things are done in the department, what kinds of programs they have. Do they have a lecture series? Do they have a departmental seminar? And so on. So let me get back to the job talk. We did, I think I went through 1 through 4. We started with the thank yous. 2 was the anecdotes. 3, repeat the question. 4, you did this literature thing. 5 is now you have to, before you answer your question, you have to establish your credibility. Why should they believe you when you are going to now tell us the solution to the problem? And that means you want to bring in, again, just a couple of minutes on, do you have experience in this? Did you spend 6 months in the archives? Did you go to another country and do field research? Did you work in a lab for 3 years? And a little bit about what happened in that lab? All these things establish your bona fides as a researcher. You want to talk about your data collection, that they know that the data are reliable data, and you want to talk about your methods of analysis. So this is a whole methodological section, but it's really establishing you. I want you to think about it as establishing your credibility as a researcher. That's part 5. Part 6 is repeat the question again. Okay, you've gone through the methodology. Their minds have wandered. They're thinking about you doing research in I don't know, some neighborhood in Akko maybe. And you say, well, let's get back to it. Remember my question? Repeat the question. And then give your answer, which is the heart of the talk. That is where you're going to really give the data and the analysis, and make sure you don't want to be too much of a braggart, but you want to say what the chidush is. What is your contribution here? Why is this really important? Make sure you put your answer, if it's narrowly focused, which is okay, into the broader context of the importance of it, why it is so essential to know, and why your answer is right and new and original, okay? Part 7, you're going to summarize the question again. That's already, I think, the 4th time you've given the question. And summarize your answer briefly. And then go back to the advanced theory. And sort of say, we talked about the theory briefly at the beginning. Let me just come back to that for a minute, because I think I have something to say to those guys. I think I have something to say about how the field is shaped. And that is very, very important. And then you want to perhaps raise some questions at the very end about things that you didn't answer, that are left open, or that questions that are raised by your research. And that will give them, and you should give them, a sense of the trajectory of your research. Here's where I want to go with this now. Here's where I'm going to take it from here. Here's the project I think I see myself going towards. Now, before I get to part 8, which is answering their questions, I want to say something about PowerPoint. I'd say that 95% of the people who do PowerPoint do it poorly. And I have my own ideas what poorly and good is. You don't have to agree with them. But let me say what my idea is. If you have a lot of text in your PowerPoint, people are not going to be looking into your eyes and listening to you. They're going to be looking over your shoulder at the screen, or at the screen sharing, and not listening to you. And they're going to be reading, and they can't hear you and read at the same time. I believe in minimal text in PowerPoint. I believe images are very good. Sometimes graphs or figures that are very illustrative are good. But you don't want to have a whole slide after slide after slide of what you're saying orally, because it will basically take their attention away from you, and you want the attention on you. So use your slides judiciously. You don't need a lot of them. And when you have something that's text, like I said, have the question in a sentence form, have it up there alone, and stop with them to let them read it, and then move on. I think it's really, really important to use PowerPoint judiciously and not simply be the text of your talk coming slide after slide after slide. It's very boring when that happens. I have another question here. What if I was working and have results from several different fields or subfields? That's a good question. I certainly would, I have two answers to it, which are contradictory. The first answer is you don't want to go off into too many directions in the talk. You want this talk to be one, that when somebody walks out of the room and someone else comes up to her and says, "Where were you just now?" "Oh, I was in, Rachel's job talk." "Oh, really? What was it about? What was her question?" "Oh, that's interesting. What was the answer? What was the argument?" Okay. If you are going into too many different directions, they cannot present that to someone else, and that means they haven't absorbed what you said. So you want to keep it simple, not to go off into too many different subfields. That's the first part of the answer. The second, which I contradict myself, is sometimes the key to your answer or the way you want to focus the talk is how you've made a bridge between two fields. And that is your focus. And in that case, you can speak about the literature of each field as being kind of interesting in its own right, but insufficient in really looking at the connections. And that's what you're going to do. So I think that that's perfectly okay to structure it that way. The final part of the job talk is there's a Q&A. Answer questions. Now, I have to say, you're going to meet a lot of different personality types. You're going to have questions that are genuinely, "Gee, that's really interesting. How did you do this?" Or, "Could you elaborate on that?" And they're really encouraging questions, ones that allow you to expand on what you've said and really to show your depth of knowledge. Again, like in what I talked about, the pre-interview, keep your answers to about 2 minutes. Don't let them ramble on too long. Then you're going to have questions which are really kind of lectures from somebody else. You've seen this all the time in places. They're going to give their long discourse on what they think is the way to do it. Okay. You can't do much. You can just listen, and you could say, that's a really interesting way of looking at it too, kind of say something, and that's it. Then you're going to have the hostile question. Often these are not people who are necessarily hostile to you. They want to see how you react on your feet. Sometimes they are hostile. I'm going to give 2 examples. One was Robert Cohen was a famous political scientist at Harvard and other places. And he said, "I always like to ask the trick question. I want to see how they react to something that they haven't thought about before." Now, I said to him, I said, "Bob, you work at Harvard, and tell me how many of your colleagues are so quick on their feet." This is not showing whether they're good academics. It's just showing whether they're quick on their feet. That's not really a trait that's so important. But you may expect questions like that. We'll talk about how you respond to them. And then you find hostile questions. I was at a departmental seminar of the sociology department recently, and a woman raises her hand and says, "Nothing you said is new. This is all repeating what we know already, and it was banal and boring." And that was her question. Okay? Be prepared. There are people who do that. I think they're terrible people, but they do it. So how do you respond to these? Again, don't get defensive. Don't say, "I think I really do have something new to say here." and I think you're wrong. Don't do it. It's not the way to do it. You want to handle these kinds of questions in as positive a way as you can. Your point is, your point is well taken that the literature has discussed X and Y. What I was really trying to do here was, okay, so you're acknowledging the questioner's, the substance, if there was any substance there, to what they're saying, and you're going on and giving your point, and it gives you an opportunity to, again, revisit what your contribution is. Finally, the last thing on the job interview is never, ever answer a question that you have not thought through previously. Don't try, you're going to be tempted, because you're smart people, to generate answers on the spot. Don't do it. If you get a question that you don't know the answer to, you say, I really haven't dealt with that issue. That's really an interesting question. I want to think more about it. And then pivot and say, what I have thought about, which is related to what you're asking, and then say what you know, okay? Don't ever try to answer a question on the spot that you haven't thought through carefully before. So I said there were 3 or 4 elements to the in-person interview. The fourth that sometimes happens, I don't know if it happens in Israel or not, is the dinner. There is often this is in the United States, this is the opportunity for poor faculty to go to fancy restaurants and have the department pay for it. And usually there are 4 or 5 people, sometimes the search committee, sometimes others, in which you have a dinner with these people. This dinner is actually very important, and I think it's absolutely essential, because you're catching people there who, first of all, they're drinking a little wine, and so they are speaking more than perhaps they should. And so you listen. You're going to find out, you're going to see them interacting, you're going to hear what they say about the department, about issues that you're interested in. You can find out more about intradepartmental relations just listening at these dinners than you can anywhere else. Someone's right, in Israel, the fancy restaurant is aroma. Yeah, I think that may be true. If I'm a young researcher this is a question, who has completed a PhD recently, is it better to present materials from the PhD or from other projects done after it? I think you can do either one. I think you want to do the one you feel most comfortable with. I would not do a new project if it's still in process. That's something you want to do at a departmental seminar after you have a job. But when you want to get a job, you want to present the material that you're totally confident in, that you really feel you've got it down. So let me close with 2 things. One is some small tips. All right, at the dinner, don't drink wine. Pretend you're drinking wine, but don't sip it because it loosens your lips. And I've seen candidates just start to say things about themselves and their personal lives that really put their position in jeopardy. Well, my wife works somewhere else, and I don't know if I would take this job because she may not move with me. They don't have to know that, right? You don't want to say anything to them that's unnecessarily. Second tip. Don't get tired. Now, that may sound funny to you, because remember I said at the beginning, these interviews are extremely intense and they are very, very tiring. But you can postpone tiredness. You can say to yourself, I will not be tired until I walk out of the gates of that university or shut down the Zoom or whatever it is. Don't allow fatigue, because again, I have seen over and over again, people kind of overcome by fatigue, sometimes in their actual job talks. And you can see the second half of the job talk, after their adrenaline has been flowing, that they are kind of flat. Don't allow that to happen. Think about how you are going to dress at these interviews. That's important. It differs for different places, and you want to find out what the culture of the particular place you're at. Again, a silly anecdote, a student of mine was at the American Political Science Association meetings. This is a huge meeting, it was years ago. And I saw him and I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to a job interview." And I said, "No, you're not. You don't have a sport coat on." And at that, the culture of the American Political Science Association is you wouldn't go to a job interview without a sport coat. I said, you got to find a sport coat now before you get into that interview. The same is true for women. You want to be very careful, think about, and try and find out what the appropriate dress would be. Another small tip, ask as many questions as you can. I mentioned that to you earlier. And then finally, my last tip is always express enthusiasm and never express doubts, okay? Never express negativity. There is a time to express negativity. I'll tell you when in a minute, but not in the job interview. You don't want, they'll say to you, "Well, we have a teaching load of 6 courses each semester. How do you feel about that?" You're not going to say, "Whoa, that's really a lot of teaching. I don't know if I want to do that." You're going to say, "I love teaching. Teaching is wonderful. It's really you want to." If they're going to ask you, would you take, would you be willing to take on this part or do that or whatever, always say yes. Always be enthusiastic and always tell them how wonderful you think the department is. Tell them, "This place just seems like a perfect fit for me. I really like what I'm hearing here. I love your faculty. I talked with the students. They were so exciting." They want to see, let me tell you the reason that you want to do this, okay? Departments vote on who gets the job. And often there are different opinions of who should get the job if there are several different candidates. And one factor that is always used is, I don't think that person is going to move to Seattle. They express some hesitation about it being so far away. That already hurt that person in the debate within the department. Any negativity is going to hurt you. It's going to be used by those who are supporting someone else. And so you always want to express your commitment to what they're doing. Finally, the last part is going to take me 1 minute, which is the interview follow-up. The third thing I said, we got to do prep, there's the interview itself, and the interview follow-up. And what you want to do here is you want to send thank you emails to everybody you spoke to the chair, to the dean, to each member of the search committee, to faculty you talked to. You want to write, and you want those to be personal. You want to tell them how you think this job would really fit you and how excited you are about it. And then you want to say, I really loved when we talked about X or Y or your article on such and such. Give a kind of personal sentence or two in there that shows that you're not just doing this as a boilerplate kind of activity. Make it personal. Refer to something that when you talk to them in the conversation came up. Make sure it really is good. And again, proofread that email. Do not allow there to be any mistakes of grammar, syntax, typos, or any other sort. You are presenting yourself constantly. You are on display, and everybody is looking for whether there are chinks in the armor. So with that, I'm going to stop and take any other questions you might have.
So
give me your name.
Mayan.
Yeah, and Mayan, what department are you in? Where?
Physics in Israel.
In okay.
And in Israel, in astrophysics. So one question is, I think one of the questions we may be asked is like, what are our plans also regarding maybe other positions, and like what are our near future plans? And this comes to what you said about negativity, like how much shall we be, like if we're only enthusiastic, then at a later stage they may say we were not honest enough. Like how honest shall we be about the other options? This is one question.
Yeah.
And the second question is, I think as women in maybe like more masculine fields, and there will be some questions either at the dinner or like in the more like informal parts about like family. And I was wondering how much I gave birth to twins during the last year of my postdoc. Like how much do I want people to be aware of this? And
Yeah. Okay. Let's take the second one first. It's an interesting question. In the United States, I don't know if this is true in Israel, it is actually illegal to ask anybody about their family situation. That's not to say it's not done anyway, but it is illegal, and many search committees know that it's illegal and they don't. And I would say if the question did not come up, don't bring it up. You don't have to tell them that you have twins. You don't have to tell them that you're married. Don't volunteer any of that information. As soon as you mention my, Ben Zug or something like that, that opens it up for them. And it's not something you want to do. But you're asking, what if they ask about it? And if they ask about it, I would simply be as evasive as possible. I would say, do you have children? You have a family? I would say, yes, I do. And they are totally supportive of what I'm doing. And just leave it at that. Don't go into details. It's none of their business. And you want to try to cut off that line of questioning. I really emphasize that strongly. You don't want to give them the openings here. Yes, I don't know. We don't know if she's going to be able to give us the kind of commitment we want, and so on. I think you want to cut that off and simply say, thank God I have such a supportive environment. I'm able to do, what I want to do. As far as the honesty goes, I certainly would never lie to a committee, but I would volunteer, just like with the family, volunteer as little information as possible. You don't want to tell them if you have other possibilities if they haven't asked. I just don't think that it's necessary for you to do that. I'm going to come back to when you do these things. But if they do ask, you again want to express the enthusiasm for where you are. Yeah, I do have some possibilities, but I have to tell you, I am really enthusiastic. I just love what you're doing here. I just love the way you've shaped the curriculum. I love the way the faculty here, I've had such good talks today, and go off into that, into all the positive, wonderful things about the place, and leave it at that if you can. Okay. Now, when do you express negativity? When do you tell them about your family issues? And that comes after you have an offer, but before you have accepted the offer. That is your moment of maximum leverage. They have already gone through a very difficult process in the faculty meeting of coming to some consensus. Believe me, it's not easy for faculties to come to consensus. They've come to some consensus, and they don't want to start revisiting this, right? They don't want to say, oh my God, we have to go back and now get a different candidate or try and find a different consensus. They want you at this point. And that's your maximum leverage, and that's when you bargain. That's when you bargain and you say, I only want to teach in the afternoons, or I can only teach 2 days, or I need to do this, or I want a research assistant, or whatever it is that you need. That, I really don't think I can teach 12 courses. That's too many. I want to teach less. So this is your point of leverage. Use that leverage. Don't immediately accept an offer, ever. Think about what you want. Think about space. If it's a lab that you need, an office that you need. Think about research help, assistance, research funds, access to university funds for research, all sorts of things that you want to bargain for, but don't ever mention them until they have actually made you the offer.
It's Noga. Just a minute. Okay. Hi. Thank you very much. It's really, really helpful. So I actually did my graduate work in the US, and I recently came back to Israel for a postdoc. I mean, I came back before, but now I'm having a postdoc in Israel. And I did my BA in Israel. I'm in art history. And some people have advised me that now that I came back because I didn't do my graduate work here, I need to sort of make myself known to faculty in my field and to departments by doing departmental seminars and just making meetings with faculty and with chairs of departments and things like that, even before there's even any job. And I wonder if that's a good advice, because like the disadvantage of that is that you don't really get to, of course you can prepare as much as you can, but it's not like preparing for a very specific job offer that you know what they're asking for, what they're looking for, and then you prepare. And then, you only get to have like a first impression once. So I wonder if it's something you need to pursue, or it's better to just wait until there's a job and then, just do everything you said.
Yeah. I lean towards the first. That is, I lean towards getting out there as much as you can, because you want to be on people's minds. And beyond that, even if there is no job in that place, in that university, you want these people to be reading what you write, to be interacting with you on the questions in your field. You want to establish an intellectual community here in Israel. And so I think it's very important for you to be meeting with faculty, giving talks, doing all those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you.
Are there more? Let's see. What if we don't drink wine at all? Okay. I would say it's okay to drink tea and coffee. What else? Besides common politeness, you suggest to compliment the people around you. When is it too much? Where goes the line between complimenting and fake flattery? Well, as I said, you want to be genuine in these things, but I think that academics are a strange breed of people, and you can never praise them too much. So I wouldn't worry about over flattery. I think that you want to tell people how important you think, how much you enjoyed an article, that you read it, you really made you think. All those sorts of things I think are very useful. I wouldn't worry about being too much. Um, there's a question here. There's an assumption that at least someone in the SC or the search committee or the faculty is an expert in your subfield, right? What if we are applying for a position which aims to fill a subfield, but none of the faculty members is an expert? How can we go about it? Well, I mean, and that's often the case in small departments where you're really going to be the person in your subfield. And again, you have to gear everything you do, your talk and so on, to, in that case, to the more general audience that you're going to face, that you can assume that they won't know a lot of the very specialized literature that you're talking about. And in that case, it's very important to frame what you're doing as not only important in your subfield, but it's important to the field as a whole, how it might relate to the kinds of things that they would do, that you would be the kind of person they want to talk to, even though you're not in their subfield. Smadar asked, how would you respond to inappropriate questions such as your personal politics, family situation, etc.? Okay. I would, the key word here is deflect. Sometimes you just have to answer something in the sense of, are you married or do you have children? There's nothing you can say but yes or no. But I would then say, I would then move on from there to try and get them out of that. Yeah, I have children, and it really has been a pleasure just doing the kind of work I do and doing my postdoc. I have found my family very supportive and helpful to me. And I have found really that being in this kind of family situation has really helped and pushed my career forward and really made me more energetic, or whatever it is. Just deflect them away from that. On personal politics, I'd be very, very careful. It's none of their business. But you don't want to say that, but you would say, you could say something, yeah, politics are something that really interests me. I reading the newspapers all the time. I like to follow all those things without giving them a sense of where you stand on the political spectrum. Try and deflect as much as you can. We have a question from, how long should we spend talking about our future research plans in the job talk? I would use the last minute or two for that, in which a couple minutes, you have 40 minutes, so you have to allocate your time very carefully. But I think you want to show them that this is not the end, that you're really moving forward. And I would spend a few minutes on that. Okay, Adi says, even when I teach, how old am I? That's a good one. Okay. You can't get away from.
Just so you get a vision.
Yes.
Someone asked me during class in the middle, she screamed, so how old are you? And I go, I'll invite you to my bat mitzvah. As a joke.
That's good.
And then she goes back, okay, so really, how old are you? And
So in class, I would say to them, this is an inappropriate question. Let's stick to what we're doing. In a search committee meeting, they know, how old you are. It's easy to figure out looking at your CV exactly how old you are. I would answer it, but yeah, I don't think it's going to hurt you one way or another.
Okay, thank
you. That person is not that old, I can tell you.
No, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Being a young doctor is impressive. Not a bug, rather a feature. I don't know what that means.
I can't say that it's a good thing. if she's answering my question.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was referring to this question. Being young in academy is pretty much impressive. Makes you look a bit like Ruth Lawrence or something.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wish. And I'm not even from math.
That actually leads me to the opposite question, if I may.
Yeah.
So first of all, Joel, thank you very much for the great talk. But I was just wondering, so as Israelis, a lot of us are actually older than a lot of other people from other nationalities.
Yeah.
By the time we finish our PhD, by the time we finish our post, by the time we get the job talk. So particularly if we do it outside of Israel, how much is that a factor? How much is that a problem?
Good question. Well, first of all, it's in the United States, it's illegal to take that into consideration. But it's inevitable that it will. Look, I think, you know, I don't know exactly how to answer it. I think if you know, for people who are under 50, it's not going to be much of an issue. You can emphasize your life experience, other things that you've done, what you can bring to the job. So I have a PhD student recently got her PhD, and she had worked for maybe 10 years in a nonprofit in really extraordinary circumstances. And I said to her, make that into a plus. You know, what you can bring to the classroom, what you can tell students, how you can mentor students, how your life experience is really on your side. You know, when you get past 50, it's going to be hard because they're already, they're thinking about how long are we going to have this person? I don't know. But I think for most people, you're really talking about people in their, late 30s and 40s. I think you can make this into a positive. I think it's important to do that. Use it to your advantage. I would also say, just listening to you folks who are going through this now, when you do your Zoom, make sure that your kids are far, far away. You don't want to have background distraction, that sort of thing in your job interview. It's distracting and it also raises all kinds of questions that you don't, like I said, you don't want to open those questions to them. So I don't know where you can keep them, but okay. I was accepted to a postdoc in Italy. Congratulations, Itamar. And my host suggested me to apply for a scholarship for young, up to 30 researchers. Only then I told her that I'm actually 45 years old. Yeah, good. And what was the reaction, Itamar? Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're absolutely right that in Israel, this is more of an issue where people are working full-time for years or come into the career late. But I think you can make it into something positive.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we should be very grateful for you for another excellent talk. You came for us from heaven. So we are very lucky to have you, and we appreciate what you did for us today and the last two talks. We continue with Ma'avarim this term, the Corona term, and we will also have a summer syllabus or summer program. So looking forward to see you all. And again, thank you very much, Joel.
Good luck to you all.
Thank you.